This episode is one for all of you cat owners, but don't worry if you just have a dog, as in many ways the questions will be just as relevant, certainly the answers will. And I'm talking about all things weight related, starting off with how much to feed your cat and actually how to feed them as well, how to give them that food, followed on by how to recognise if they are a healthy weight or overweight, and to get that family member who is in denial, and I hope that's not you, on board with the need for a weight loss plan. Finally, I'm then switching topic completely as I talk about how to choose the best dog if you're an older person, with some really important questions that you need to ask yourself if you're thinking about getting a dog for companionship. But before we get into all that, I've got the intro.
You're listening to the Dr. Alex Answers podcast, the show that answers all of your dog and cat health questions so they can live healthier, happier lives. And here's your host, veterinarian Dr. Alex Avery.
Hi, and welcome to episode number 23 of the Dr. Alex Answer Show. If we've not met before, then I'm Dr. Alex and I'm the veterinarian behind ourpetshealth.com, and I'm delighted to have you along with me to talk about a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about. Now, obesity, feeding practices, and the benefits of our dogs and our cats being the healthiest version of themselves possible is something that I really enjoy talking about, and I think it is an incredibly important topic to cover. So make sure that you're subscribed if you're not already. And before we get into the questions, I just as well wanted to give you the heads up about some big news for the podcast. So the Dr. Alex Answer Show is actually being completely rebranded with new artwork and a new name. Now, if you've signed up for access to the Knowledge Vault and you receive my newsletter, then you'll already know about this and know that it's been on the cards as I was asking you about your thoughts on a new name. And really the reason for this is that it's become apparent to me that people, that they're seeing the current name and they've really just got no idea what the show is about, or they think it really is a human health related podcast, and that's clearly not true. It's dealing with dogs and cats and their healthcare, and I'm a veterinarian, so really it was clear that a rebrand was needed. So the new name to look out for is Call the Vet with Dr. Alex Avery. So that's going to be probably next week. That's going to be coming out maybe the week after if I don't kind of get the last few jobs I've got to do finished. But don't worry, it's going to be the same great content. I'm going to be answering all of your dog and cat health questions. And there's also going to be a new feature rolled out where you can actually leave me a voicemail message. So you can leave me a message rather than have to kind of sit there and type out your question. You can just record an audio version, which can then be featured on the show. Obviously, if you're a bit shy and you don't want to speak to me, that's absolutely fine. You can still write in, and that will still be a way to get in touch, because really this podcast is for you. It's about answering all of the questions that you need answered. Now, if you're subscribed, you also don't need to do anything at all. So the title, the artwork will all change automatically, and you'll continue to receive every single episode of the show. And so on to the first question, and this comes from Lords of Podtown, and it was actually sent to me on Twitter, and they write, how do I know how much to feed my cat? I feel like most food dishes are too big. This is a fantastic question. So, you know, it kind of factors into how we're actually feeding our cats as well as how much to feed them, and obviously they're closely linked. But never feed just by filling up a bowl. That's the first thing. Never ever just kind of fill up a bowl and keep filling it up when it becomes empty or as it's getting low. So we call that ad lib feeding, which basically means that your cat is deciding how much they're going to eat and they've just got free access to food. So it always used to be thought that dogs, we actually needed to feed set meals, but cats, you could just leave food down. They'd self-regulate. They're, you know, pretty good at only eating when they're hungry, and they're not going to get overweight. But really, that is not true at all, as I'll discuss later. So never ad lib feed, never just fill up the bowl. Kind of the next thing to say is that any feeding guides really are just that. They're guides rather than rules. So we want to be taking all of these steps, and we want to be constantly reevaluating based on the size of your cat and the weight of your cat and the condition that they are. So kind of the first step, if you like, is to feed the most appropriate diet for your cat. That's going to really make sure that they're getting all the nutrients that they need that are appropriate for their life stage. So, you know, are they a kitten? Are they an adult? Are they a geriatric cat? Are they neutered? Because neutered animals need significantly less energy than entire animals, than sexually intact animals. Do you need to feed a light diet, a weight loss diet? So feed the most appropriate diet for your cat is going to help you not just feed the right amount, but also feed the right amount, ensuring that they get the nutrients that they require, and going to help prevent them from becoming overweight while maintaining their muscle mass as well, which is clearly very important. So The second step, once you know what diet to feed, is to determine kind of what your cat's ideal weight is. And we do this in kind of the main way we do this is by doing something called a condition score or a body condition score. And it's a way of asking some simple questions that really just let you know whether your cat's overweight, and that takes into account the frame of your cat, so the size of your cat's body, how long their torso is, how long their legs are, that kind of thing. So you don't have to rely on breed charts or standard weight charts, which really are very kind of inappropriate. They're very inaccurate. They have really wide ranges that's going to be off by a significant amount for a large number of individuals. So we need to condition score. And again, I'm going to be talking about that actually in a later question. And the other way to determine your cat's ideal weight is clearly to have a vet check. So get your vet to check your cat over, or next time you're in for vaccinations or for whatever kind of health concerns they might have, ask your vet what their ideal weight is, because, you know, we're seeing cats come through the clinic every day. We're going to be seeing, 10, 15 cats. It depends on how busy the clinic is, of course, but we're going to be seeing multiple cats every day. And so we really do know what an ideal weight of a cat should be. And we can really very quickly assess whether your cat is a healthy weight, whether they're overweight, obviously whether they're underweight as well. And we're going to be able to give you a guide of what their ideal weight would be. Now, the next step then for feeding your cat is, if they're a healthy weight, then actually just start with using the guide on the side of a packet. Now, in my experience, they do tend to be overestimated amounts, so it's pretty common for the food manufacturers to slightly overestimate the amount that you should feed your cat. Now, the cynical among you will say, well, that's so that they can feed, that's so that you're feeding more food, so you're buying more food and they're making more money. There may certainly be some truth in that, but also they will say that they need to make sure that the amount they're feeding is going to be appropriate for every cat, and so they tend to make their assumptions based on maybe an entire cat that is very, very active, rather than the majority of cats who are neutered and who lead kind of quite sedentary, quite quiet, quite inactive lifestyles, and so they're going to need much less energy. So we also, really need to take into account that into the equation. Like I say, that's going to then involve going back and monitoring your cat's weight to see if they're gaining weight and becoming overweight, or whether they're maintaining the weight nicely, or obviously if the weight's falling off them and actually we don't want them to lose any weight. We also need to take into account any treats or any other diets, any other things that we're feeding your cat in the day. So if you're regularly giving your cat a treat at breakfast, or when you go to bed, or at some other point of time, you need to be reducing the amount of food that you're giving them, otherwise they're normal kind of cat food. So we need to not just think about how much of the diet we should be feeding and think of that as the sole thing if we're giving other treats or other things for your cat to eat. So the next step to feeding the right amount, or giving your cat the right amount, is that if they're overweight, then you actually need to feed for their healthy weight. So that means if you say you've got a 5 kilogram cat who should be 4 kilograms, then you need to look on the side of the pack and say, and find out how much that 4 kilogram weight should be, amount that you should be feeding for a 4 kilogram weight, and then actually reduce that by about 15%. So if, for example, and this is going to be too much, but if, for example, it said a 4 kilogram cat should feed, you should be feeding 100 grams of food a day, well, actually you then need to reduce that by 15%. So you would need to feed 85 grams a day to your cat if they're overweight and you're wanting them to lose weight. And then if you got an obese cat, so if they're really heavy, if they're significantly overweight, then really you need to have a really proper weight loss diet and a weight loss plan, just to maximize the chance of them achieving their healthy weight. And there's a number of different ways that we can do that. Once all that's done, also always monitor your weight, and like I say, adjust if they're gaining or if they're getting too thin. It's not just something that you do once, you kind of then forget about it, you ignore it, because the chances are is your cat will gain weight. It's such a common problem. And then, as I could have mentioned in the intro, we also need to think about how we're actually feeding our cats. So the temptation is, and what the majority of us will be doing, is simply popping it into the food bowls. Your cat will be going straight to their food bowl at dinner time. They're going to be kind of hoovering up their food. It's going to take them no time at all. And that's really not great for their mental activity, for their well-being, also for the amount that they're eating, because they're really gorging themselves and they're filling themselves up before the feelings of being full hit their brain. So they're continuing to eat despite the fact that they've eaten more than enough. So we can use, instead of food bowls, we can use activity toys. You can use food puzzles, just to make your pet have to work, make your cat have to think about how they're going to get that food. So that's things like treat balls, which are balls that you unscrew, you can fill up with food, and then your cat has to kind of bat it around along the floor. As the ball rolls along, there's a hole that the food falls out of, and they get one piece at a time. There are other food puzzles where you hide things and your cat has to perform certain tasks to get to it, or they have to try and kind of dig it out of a long hollow tube. There's a whole number of different ways of activity feeders and different things that we can use, as well as slow down eating. It, like I say, it really improves mental agility, so it gives your cat something to do. Their life can often be pretty boring. They're just sitting there sleeping all the time because there's not much to do. Cats aren't big players, but if you motivate them with food, then they're going to have a much happier time at meal times. They're going to eat less, they're less likely to gain weight. And then just before we get into the next question, I wanted to let you know that I've got loads of information over at ourpetshealth.com all about feeding your cat, all about feeding your dog as well, about weight loss, healthy weight management, as well as all of the different diets that you might be considering. I've got a whole wealth of information all about kind of grain-free diets, about raw feeding, about some of the food recalls some of the bigger brands have experienced. So definitely head over to those. I'll link them in the show notes, and have a little check of those to give your pet the best chance of being the healthiest version of themselves possible.
You're listening to the Dr. Alex Answers Show.
And then my next question is also on the weight front, and it's from Subin, who writes that Subin's soon-to-be brother-in-law has 2 British short hairs. He knows that this breed is more chunky looking than others, but one of his cats is clearly way obese. They're only 2 years old, and I can only see it getting worse from here on in. The future brother-in-law feeds them 4 times a day, basically still feeds them kitten amounts, and the fat one finishes off everything the skinnier one doesn't eat. So what can Subin say to encourage him to put the poor cat on a diet? I've said things before, but he denies the cat is fat, calling him cute and saying it's normal for the breed. So Subin, your brother-in-law is not alone. As I've already hinted at, obesity, being overweight in our pet cats and our pet dogs is a huge problem. And actually in the US alone, 60% of cats are classed as overweight or obese. So that's really huge. 60% of cats are classed as overweight or obese. But despite this, 80% of pet owners think that their pet is a healthy weight. So this clearly means that there are a lot of cats out there who are overweight or obese, and yet their owners don't appreciate there being a problem. So it's not that they recognize that their cat's overweight and they don't care and they're quite happy with that situation. They actually don't recognize it as a problem. They recognize their cat as being a healthy weight, despite in some cases being significantly heavier and even almost twice as heavy as they should be. And really, in my experience, unless a pet owner recognizes that their cat or their dog is overweight and accepts that this is a problem, then there's actually little chance of them taking any action to correct the situation, because it's something that takes commitment, it takes dedication, it takes a long time. And so you really need to be aware of the problems. You need to be committed to getting your cat down to the healthiest weight that they can be. But people, they really just don't see it, and they're going to accept that they're going to think that their pet is, just a little bit chunky, or, they're big boned is the classic one, isn't it? So, your brother-in-law isn't alone here. And I think part of the reason is because we're just so accustomed to seeing overweight animals. So if 60% of cats are overweight, it really is the case that the vast majority of cats that people are seeing are overweight, and it's skewed our perception of normal. So we're seeing these animals and we're thinking them as normal, when in fact, they are carrying too much weight. The flip side also is that I've had clients come to me in my consult room to say, I'm just bringing my dog or my cat in for a checkup because people keep telling me they're skinny, they're underweight, they're really unhealthy. And actually these cats and these dogs are a picture of health. They're really lean, they're nice and well muscled, and it's exactly what a dog or a cat should look like. But again, because we're so used to seeing overweight animals, people are saying that they're underweight, they're not healthy, and something needs to be done. And even they're saying that the owners aren't feeding them properly, they're not looking after them properly, and they're effectively neglecting their pet, which couldn't be further from the truth. So with all this in mind, my first piece of advice to try and kind of get somebody to accept that their pet is overweight and that action needs to be taken is it's really important not to judge or to be kind of accusatory towards them. So don't kind of start going in there kind of all guns blazing, saying you're doing a really bad job, it's all your fault, you're overfeeding your pet, look at what you've done to them, because that's only going to get them in a super defensive mood. They're not going to be kind of accepting anything that you say. They're just going to stop listening, and you're going to have a falling out, and no good is going to come of that situation. So, we really need to be accepting of the fact that actually having an overweight dog or cat is a really common and a really easy situation to get into. And actually it's generally due to kind of a misplaced love rather than neglect. So we're giving treats, we're giving extra treats, we're giving extra kind of snacks and tidbits, we're giving them portions of our own food, because that's the way that we show our affection towards our dog or our cat. Be aware that kind of this obesity and this weight comes from a place of love rather than a place of neglect. And also we need to accept that environment and genetics also play a role too. So it may be actually out of kind of their hands, out of the owner's hands. For example, Labradors, there is a certain genetic makeup of certain strains, certain lines of Labradors, that they actually don't have a feeling of full, or it doesn't switch on until they've eaten far too much, and so they're really prone to overeating. It's a bit of a joke that we think of kind of Labradors dustbins on legs, because they'll just eat anything and they'll fill themselves up, and that's because they're actually genetically programmed not to feel full. So we need to take all of those things into account, and being judging or being accusatory really would just be the worst thing to do. And then, how can we get them to accept that their pet is overweight then? Well, get them to body condition score their cat or their dog themselves. So that's a way, like I said in the last question, that's a way of just assessing whether or not your cat is their ideal weight, regardless of the size of their body, how big their bones are, if you like, the size of their frame, that kind of thing. So to do this, they have to answer kind of three questions for a cat. And the first one is can you feel their ribs? So there should be a minimal fat covering. You shouldn't need to have any pressure placed on their kind of across their chest. You just run their fingers from front to back, and you should feel the ribs kind of gently trickling over your fingers without putting any pressure. If you're having to put a little bit of pressure and there's a little bit of sponginess there, then that's a sign that there's a potential for being overweight. If you can't feel their ribs, or you're having to put a lot of pressure on to feel them, then your cat is overweight, full stop. Now, the next question that you have to ask is, do they have a clear waist from above? So if we look at our cat from above, then they should have a kind of an hourglass figure. They should be kind of wider at the ribs. As you run your hands down towards their back, they should have a kind of a tuck in their abdomen, and then it should get wider again over the hips. So that's the next thing to do. If it's becoming square, if your cat's becoming square when you're doing that, then again, they're becoming overweight. If they're round, so if they're more like a balloon and they're actually wider in the waist, in their belly, then again, that means that they're overweight. And then the last question really is a specific cat question to ask: is there a fat pad? So cats will generally collect excess fat in between their back legs, so we call that a fat pad. So as well as that rounding of the abdomen, there's often a fat wobble or a bit of loose skin between the back legs. Now you'll see this kind of wobbling from side to side in a really fat cat, and it might be even that it's quite close to the ground. So if you pop your hand between your cat's back legs when they're standing up, and you can kind of get a hand of something wobbly, then that says there's a fat pad there, and that means, again, full stop, they're overweight, and some action needs to be taken. So if you get your family member or your friend who's got an overweight animal but struggling to accept that, get them to condition score their cat themselves to answer those questions. And I'll also leave links in the show notes to some charts that you can use that help explain everything really clearly and give pictures to demonstrate. If you can get them to answer those questions themselves and come to the realization themselves that their cat is overweight, then that will really help highlight the problem. And then my final step would be to actually highlight the dangers and the expense of having an overweight cat. So this is going to be really beneficial if your friend or your family member knows that their pet is overweight but actually really doesn't care, or if they're not really thinking of it as an important situation. So why should I worry if my pet's overweight? I'm not interested. So highlight the dangers and highlight the expense of having an overweight cat. So some statistics for you, which I know everyone loves statistics, but obese cats, they're over 4 times more likely to suffer from diabetes. Obese cats are twice as likely to suffer from skin disease. They're 5 times more likely to suffer from arthritis and from lameness. They're also going to be at an increased anesthetic risk if they need surgery for any reasons. They're going to be at an increased risk of fatty liver, which is something that can happen if they're unwell, for example, and they stop eating for a few days. They can go into acute liver failure and die as a result of that. And ultimately, being overweight and being obese just reduces quality of life, and it reduces life expectancy, as well as, if you've got diabetes, that involves injections with insulin twice a day. So that's not just an expense with the treatment, with the insulin, with the monitoring. It's also, a big impact on kind of the owner's quality of life, because you've got to be committed to actually treating your cat twice a day. When it comes to arthritis, again, there's medications to pay for, there's monitoring blood tests to run. So all of those costs run, they really do add up. So there's, significant benefit to getting a cat down to a healthy weight, especially while they're young, and they're not going to be, kind of any harm done effectively if you can get their weight down to a healthy weight while they're young. But at any stage, there's always going to be benefits to reducing weight, and any weight loss is going to help. We certainly know with arthritis and dogs, for example, you only need 6% of weight loss, of body weight loss, to have a massive impact on comfort levels and pain levels. So, every little really does help. And then kind of my final thing to suggest would be to see if your local vet clinic, if they run any free weight checks, or nurse clinics, technician clinics, just to provide support, to provide encouragement, and to provide motivation. Because weight loss, it's a long-term objective. It's something that never really ends, because once you get to a healthy weight, once your pet gets to a healthy weight, you then need to maintain that. You want to prevent their weight just rebounding, going back up, which is something that can commonly happen because we stop thinking of it as a priority. But certainly for any pet that has been overweight and obese, concentrating on their weight, feeding them the right amount, making sure they're not gaining weight once they get down to that healthy weight, takes a lot of commitment. So having your local vet clinic kind of be your cheerleaders, be your champions, provide support, provide encouragement, and provide motivation is really, really important, and will massively increase your chance of success. And then just remember that the information that I give in these podcasts is not to substitute for a consultation and an examination with your pet's veterinarian, and it really shouldn't be taken as specific advice for any individual pet. If your pet is unwell, if they're injured, if they're suffering from any kind of problem, then talking to your vet is always the best course of action.
Get your question answered at dralexanswers.com.
And then for my last question, I'm changing tack completely, and I'm answering a question from Malcolm, who says, I'd like advice on choosing the right companion dog for a more senior couple and persuading the other half that it would be a good thing for our health. So really, if we're choosing a breed at any time of life, really, there's very little difference. There's a few key questions that we need to ask when we're thinking about bringing a dog into our family to make sure that we're choosing the right dog that's going to suit your lifestyle, suit your situation, and that includes your age and your mobility and all that kind of thing. So the 4 questions really are, do you want a big or a small breed dog? So that's going to impact the space that you're going to need for them, the strength of the dog and your ability to cope with that as well. The next question is, do you want an energetic or a quiet breed? So, an energetic breed is going to be great to get you out and about, to get you exercise, but, a quiet breed is potentially going to be more appropriate if you're, if you're not as mobile, or if there are health problems, or if you're living in a city or in a flat or something like that. Are there any specific breed problems you need to be aware of is the next thing to consider. So, we need to be aware that certain individual breeds do have problems. They're more prone to developing problems. And will you be able to cope with those? And then the next question is, do you want a young dog or an old dog? Obviously, a young puppy, a middle-aged dog, an adult dog, or an older dog. Is that going to be better for you? And really, you need to consider your lifestyle in this very importantly. So are you healthy? Are you fit? Are you active? Are you wanting a walking companion? Or do you want a more placid dog who doesn't need so much exercise because you're not going to be able to provide it to them? When it comes to thinking about a puppy, an adult dog, or a senior dog, well, puppies, they really likely have so much energy to burn. And if you're looking for a quieter dog, then a puppy of any breed, may not be the best choice. on the plus side, if you're retired, then you're likely to have a lot of time to train, to socialize your puppy, which is really important and fantastic for bonding as well. If you get an adult dog, though, they're going to be calmer than puppies, or they're likely to be calmer than puppies. They're hopefully already come trained as well. They'll be house trained, and they'll be much more level-headed, if you like, and you're going to know when you can get introduced to an adult dog that that's what their personality is going to be like, when clearly a puppy can turn into any kind of dog depending on kind of the input that gets put into them, but also their parents and things like that, which may not be apparent when you first pick up a puppy. And then is a senior dog actually going to be better for you? They're going to be more placid, they're going to be quieter, they hopefully have less problems, they'll be kind of fit in really well. They may though have health problems already, and that's something to consider. And one thing to think about as well is that if you get a senior dog, depending on kind of your age, depending on your health as well, a senior dog is less likely to outlive you, which is something to consider and something that I'll come on to, although that's a little bit of a morbid thought. And then the next thing to say is that, it's all very well. We all think of getting a new dog. We go to a breeder, we get a nice, kind of a nice, healthy puppy. And I've certainly done plenty of posts over on ourpetshealth.com about that. But local shelters or rescue charities, they're going to have dogs of all ages, all breeds and all temperaments, just waiting for that perfect home. So if you're not really sure kind of what kind of dog you're after, be that the breed that you're after, be that the age that you're after, then head down to your local shelter or rescue charity, even just for a look around. They're going to be more than happy to show you around, to talk to you about the best option for you and for your lifestyle. So as I've touched on, you also need to consider your age, your health and your living arrangement. So we need to consider that, our dogs are living longer and longer. So a small dog will often live to, 16, 18 years of age even. Some will even live longer. A larger dog, certainly the really large dogs will, potentially they'll be senior dogs by the time they get to 8 years old. They might be living until 12, some big dogs. So they're going to live for less long. How much weight can you lift is something to consider. Are you going to be able to carry your sick dog to the car? So you're going to get them to the vet if they're unwell in the middle of the night and there's no one around to help you. Are you going to be able to help them into the car if they get arthritis when they get older and they become less mobile? So, think about that. Also, if they're pulling you on the lead, are you going to be pulled over and hurt yourself, or are you going to be able to comfortably manage their strength? Also, are you likely to need to move into a retirement complex or assisted living or something like that? And what are their pet policies? If they're going to accept a small dog, but not a large dog, then that may impact your decision as well. And also, like I suggested, although a bit morbid, you want to plan for what happens if your pet outlives you. So that's going to help reduce your stress if you do become unwell, because a lot of the time your family, they won't be able to, or they won't want to take on the responsibility of bringing your dog into their house. So talk to friends or family about rehoming to them kind of well in advance. Think about estate planning. So include kind of wishes in your will and consider funds for ongoing care. Certainly in the UK, there's a charity called the Cinnamon Trust, or there's the RSPCA Home for Life scheme that you can join, and that will kind of ensure that your dog is looked after if they outlive you. And that can bring a lot of peace of mind, because we don't want to get into a situation where your older dog has to go into kind of really poor care, or ultimately may even be euthanized because a home can't be found for them, and that would just be such a sad way for them to end their life after, kind of being such loyal companions. So when it comes to some suggestions of what the best dog breed is for an older person, well, the kind of classic older person companion breeds are small dogs. So things like the Bichon Frise, your Shih Tzus, your Chihuahuas, your Westies, they're all really good companion dogs. Their size is really manageable, so they can be picked up, and they often love being picked up and cuddled, and they really are great companion personalities. You want a slightly larger dog, where you consider something like a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, might be a really good choice. A couple of other suggestions that may not think of: a greyhound can actually be a really good companion dog. It's a larger breed dog, but they are actually really placid. So we think of greyhounds as racing around the track, but actually they don't require very much energy. They can be pretty lazy, and they're fantastic companions. They're really great personalities. They're very placid. And they're great. And then the other consideration is actually, is a cat going to be better? So depending on your arrangements, you might have always had dogs in your life. You might be a real dog person, but a cat may be more suited to you in your older age, depending on your situation. And cats as well can provide great companionship and are really, valuable additions to your household. So there's a few questions there when it comes to thinking about bringing a dog into your life, and really they're, like I say, appropriate for anybody of any age and any situation, because we're thinking about kind of starting a relationship that needs to last for your dog's lifetime. So we don't want to be taking it lightly. We don't want to make the wrong decision and regret that, and even need to kind of end up rehoming your dog because you're not able to cope, or they're, completely the wrong character and something that you shouldn't have considered. So run through those questions and have a little think, and also talk to your local shelter or rescue charity, because they're going to be able to work with you to kind of narrow it down to find absolutely the best dog for you. Right, so that's it for this episode of the podcast. Help keep the pet cat population lean and healthy by sharing this episode with your cat-owning friends and family. Or, of course, if you've got any seniors in your life thinking about bringing a new dog into their lives, then make sure you send them this way. Also, remember to subscribe, and until next time, take care.
You've been listening to the Dr. Alex Answers podcast. Be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of the show where you ask the questions and Dr. Alex answers.